Order, please. Order. The time allotted for oral question period has elapsed. Government business. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
No justice.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
No justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just on a point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition asked during question period of the Premier to table the report in regards to the Department of Transportation and Public Works at the time for the condition assessment and recapitalization of the Joe Howe building. I'd like to table that at this time, please.
The report is tabled. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, will you please call Bill number 13, the Probate Act?
Bill number 13, the Probate Act.
Thank you very much.
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and to begin debate on second reading for amendments to the Probate Act. Mr. Speaker, these amendments will remove the requirement that people who act as witnesses to a handwritten will must be present when the will is written. Mr. Speaker, the practice in most other Canadian jurisdictions is to allow a handwritten will to be proven by an affidavit stating that the person is familiar with the handwriting of the writer and believes that the will was written by that person. We wish to adopt that practice here in Nova Scotia. The Wills Act was previously amended in 2006 to allow handwritten or holograph wills. These amendments support the changes made to the Wills Act. Mr. Speaker, these changes update the Probate Act and bring it more in line with similar acts in other Canadian jurisdictions. In addition, these amendments will make it easier for people to ensure their final wishes are fulfilled. With those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the support of other parties in regard to these amendments, and as I say, with my honourable colleagues, if there's any particular follow-up, I look forward to the interventions. I move second reading.
The Honourable the Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the NDP caucus on Bill number 13, the amendments to Chapter 31, the Acts of 2000, the Probate Act. During the steep learning curve since I've been involved with the Department of Justice, and at the briefing on this particular bill, the obvious question was asked and explained at the time. When I returned from the bill briefing, I was explaining to the member from Cape Breton Centre, with his strong legal background, the particular conditions with Bill 13. And at the time, Mr. Speaker, the member from Cape Breton Centre was intrigued with what a holograph will was. Immediately I said to him, I know the answer to that, and if I was a lawyer, I'd charge you $100 for consultation. And I guess that's why we need lawyers in this province. The one example that I can give is that recently I was called upon to notarize a handwritten will by a woman who was involved in a situation on Prince Edward Island. And at that time I was aware of the fact that I had to recognize, or she called upon me to recognize the fact that this was actually her handwriting. This particular change is making it consistent with earlier amendments. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. With earlier amendments to the Wills Act, and it is, of course, something that will be well received in our community around the province, making it easier for people with handwritten wills. With those few comments, we look forward to this going to law amendments, and it has the support of this caucus. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable the Minister of Education on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I would like people's attention drawn to the gallery opposite. We have folks here visiting us from China, Taiwan, and also from the city of Halifax. I would like to welcome them to Canada, to Nova Scotia, to Halifax, and to the legislature. And I would like to introduce them. Perhaps they could stand up and we could acknowledge them. Mr. Sai Gin-si, Mr. Tom Wu, Mr. Bruce Yi, Mr. Robert Spence, and Ms. Wendy Chen. Congratulations.
A warm welcome to all our guests visiting us this afternoon. The Chair will now recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise as a justice critic to make a few remarks on Bill number 13, the amendments to the Probate Act. Mr. Speaker, as has been mentioned by the Minister of Justice, when we made the changes to the Wills Act, it was obvious the need was there to, as well, update the Probate Act. So we're basically catching up here on something that should have been done at the same time as those changes. But, Mr. Speaker, allow me to take the opportunity again, as a lawyer and a member of the bar, to make a few comments on the issue of holograph wills, better known as handwritten wills. It's important that our legislation be there to recognize in cases where there are handwritten wills. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that it's important for us as legislators and important for the Minister of Justice to continue to caution Nova Scotians on using the practice of handwritten wills. Mr. Speaker, I've seen numerous people come through my office, both my law office and constituency office, who have raised concerns about having a will, what's required, and even the new legal will kits that are out. Mr. Speaker, people's estates can be very complicated, especially if there's investments, if there's multiple property holdings, if there's insurance benefits that are there. The idea that the average person can sit there and simply write a handwritten will which will deal with all the technicalities of their estate is one that is of great concern, and that is why most lawyers will encourage people to go see an attorney to get their will done rather than trying to write it on their own or to rely on these homemade will kits that have been coming out. Mr. Speaker, I've been aware of many of the issues that have come up with people with wills over the years, and if there's one thing Nova Scotians do their best to avoid is having to pay any more taxes or fees on the administration of their estate than is required. And there are very simple things that people can do both in their will and in the administration of their estate to avoid complications following their passing, many of which people are not aware of. Mr. Speaker, I give you some obvious examples. The old practice here in Nova Scotia always was that when people were registering their deeds, it was registered in the husband's name only. That was an old practice. Fortunately, that practice has been changing so that it's usually a joint tenancy that's now taking place with the registration of these deeds. But we're still seeing situations where seniors in Nova Scotia, once they pass, when it comes to the administration of their estate, the deed is still only in their name, which causes issues with probate and creates complications which could easily have been avoided had the deed been changed prior to their passing. Ownership of vehicles only being in one spouse's name creates difficulties. And, Mr. Speaker, I've even seen a case where what people don't realize is that while a will is there to take note of their wishes and everything else, there are sometimes some complications that arise. For example, when you get life insurance, the person you put on as your beneficiary for that life insurance is who will be the beneficiary of that life insurance policy, regardless of what's in your will. And, Mr. Speaker, there are many cases where individuals may change their mind over the years as to who they wish to be that beneficiary, yet they never change their insurance policy, and they think that they're covered simply through their will. And many cases, Speaker, this has happened where people have changed spouses or have decided they want a different beneficiary and they were not aware of that. And those are some of the dangers that people aren't aware and would not be told of unless they're going to see someone who is experienced on the issue of wills and estates, which is why I once again take this opportunity to remind Nova Scotians the importance that they get proper advice when they are putting together their wills. Handwritten wills should be an instrument of last resort, not something that we encourage people to do, because the last thing any Nova Scotians want is that if they are leaving the wishes for their estate, is that their wishes are not upheld because of the fact they did not properly indicate those through their last will and testament. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to any presentations we may receive at law amendments, but certainly we would be supporting this bill going to that stage of the process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair will now recognize the Honourable the Minister of Justice to close debate on Bill number 13.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank my honourable colleagues for their interventions on Bill 13, the Probate Act, and indeed the honourable member for Richmond raised some very valuable points and of concern to Nova Scotians. However, as you would also know, there are circumstances, as he's probably witnessed himself, where people have had a need to do that. So I think he's had some sage advice to offer to Nova Scotians, as well as the interventions from the honourable member from Timberley Prospect. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of the Probate Act.
Thank you. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Against? Motion carried.
13, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 2000, the Probate Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 7, the Motor Vehicle Act?
Bill number 7, the Motor Vehicle Act. The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise today to move second reading of Bill number 7, amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing too many injuries and far too many fatalities this year, and there's no simple solution to stopping this trend on our highways. That is the reason we need, and I stress need, to make several road safety amendments to the Act. We've introduced this bill to make our community safer and to address the concerns of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, street racing is a danger to the public, and Nova Scotians will not tolerate such a dangerous activity. These amendments will give law enforcement officials and public prosecutors the tools they need to address street racing and other dangerous driving acts. Several provincial jurisdictions have addressed street racing through provincial motor vehicle and traffic safety legislation, including Ontario, Manitoba, and BC. This activity is an emergency issue in Nova Scotia, and we need to stop it before more Nova Scotians are killed or seriously injured. These amendments will increase penalties for street racing and related activities, including impounding vehicles for longer periods of time, suspending licenses at the roadside, levying substantial fines, and significantly increasing consequences for repeat offenders. The amendments allow law enforcement officers to act immediately by suspending a driver's license for 7 days at roadside to prevent offenders from the temptation of reoffending. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, there are a large number of Nova Scotians operating vehicles with a suspended driver's license. By impounding the vehicle, we're not only preventing reckless behavior, we're protecting the law-abiding driving public from these dangerous acts. Our measures will include immediate vehicle impoundment from 24 hours to 7 days, increasing the fines for street racing summary offenses from the current $250 to $1,000 for first offense, from the current $500 to $5,000 for a second offense, and from the current $1,000 to $10,000 for third and subsequent offenses. Mr. Speaker, these tough measures will send a message that Nova Scotia will not tolerate street racing in our communities. Police will have new tools to act immediately to curtail street racing and other extremely dangerous driving behaviors, and public prosecutors will have the ability to successfully prosecute offenders. Significant penalties will serve as a deterrent to street racing and other related behaviors. Mr. Speaker, this bill addresses serious concerns Nova Scotians have about cellular phone use and other driver distractions in motor vehicles. This bill makes an offense to use a handheld cellular telephone while operating a motor vehicle. Driver distraction and inattention are leading causes of crashes, and taking action to address distractions will help to reduce injuries and deaths in Nova Scotia. It is estimated that about 20% of crashes are linked to driver distraction. Mr. Speaker, we are concerned for the safety of all Nova Scotians, and evidence points to the fact our young drivers are at the greatest risk of distractions inside their motor vehicle. Driver distraction is a growing concern for government and for Canadians. About 70% of Canadians consider distracted driving a serious issue, up from just 40% in the year 2001. An Angus Reid poll conducted in 2007 found that 76% of Canadians would support a federal ban on cell phones while behind the wheel. Here in our own province, a survey conducted by my department indicated that 88% of Nova Scotians think it is unsafe to use a handheld cellular phone while operating a motor vehicle. Other road safety stakeholders have advocated for a total ban on mobile devices while operating a motor vehicle. And to them, I would say, consult with police forces, as they are the agencies who have to enforce this legislation. Discussions I've had with Nova Scotia's policing community have convinced me that a ban on handheld devices while operating a motor vehicle is enforceable, while a hands-free ban would be problematic from an enforcement perspective. Mr. Speaker, I believe it's incumbent upon all members of this House to create laws that are measured and enforceable. Cellular phone use, while it's just one form of driver distraction, is a growing problem. The amendments will also give us the ability through regulation to prohibit other specific distractions and include other electronic devices as technology changes so that government can respond effectively to new concerns as they arise. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to making crosswalks around the province safer for pedestrians and for motorists. The Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal has worked cooperatively with Halifax Regional Municipality on a joint crosswalk safety task force. This was to address our shared concerns over crosswalk safety. This government is deeply disturbed about deaths that have occurred at crosswalks, particularly in the Halifax Regional Municipality. The crosswalk-related rules and responsibility amendments are based on recommendations contained in the midterm report from Joint Crosswalk Safety Task Force. The final report from the task force is due shortly and is expected to contain specific recommendations on education, engineering, and enforcement aspects of crosswalk safety. While pedestrian fatalities have significantly declined in Nova Scotia over the past 40 years, I would urge all members of this House to agree that even one fatality is too many. Since 2000, Nova Scotia has recorded 78 pedestrian fatalities. 11 fatalities occurred at crosswalks. My responsibility as Minister responsible for Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal is to do everything within my power to ensure that pedestrians and motorists are safe on Nova Scotia roads. These legislative amendments will clarify the responsibilities of pedestrians and drivers for crosswalk safety, an important first step in making crosswalks safer for Nova Scotians. Clarifying the present legislation enables the development of reliable enforcement strategies to respect pedestrians and educational materials to promote safer use of our crosswalks by pedestrians and increased awareness by drivers. Fine levels for motorists who fail to yield to a pedestrian will be doubled and provide for an automatic 7-day suspension of license. For a first offense, the fine will now be $500. For a second offense, the fine will be $1,000. In a third and subsequent offense, the fine will be now $2,000. In addition, a person's driver's license will be suspended from the present 24-hour suspension to a new penalty of 7 days. By suspending a driver's license for a crosswalk infraction, we are sending a message that this is a serious infraction and attitudes must change regarding our streets if we are to save lives and have the necessary respect for our fellow citizens. This government is committed to putting the necessary funding in place to educate the general public and targeted groups about the legislative changes. Public awareness is a key component of this legislation and the outcomes that we hope to achieve. The bill will enable legislation for the use of red light enforcement cameras at intersections and also the use of photo radar on a trial basis. Mr. Speaker, I know that all my colleagues in this House will agree that collisions in intersections account for a significant portion of our traffic injuries and deaths. One of the reasons is driver inattention, but another major factor is racing through intersections to beat a red light. For the sake of trying to save a few minutes, too many lives have been lost and too many preventable injuries have occurred. From 2001 to 2006, there have been 2,864 injuries and 10 fatalities recorded as a result of collisions at signalized intersections in Nova Scotia. Photo enforcement of speeding and red light violation programs will play an important role in reducing motor vehicle collisions, fatalities, and serious injuries in Nova Scotia by encouraging drivers and improve their driving habits. The use of electronic image capturing equipment, including photo radar safety cameras and intersection safety cameras, is proven, Mr. Speaker, to make significant contributions to improving road safety by reducing speeding and intersection collisions. Extensive research over the past 20 years and the positive results of imaging capturing equipment in other provinces and other jurisdictions support the implementation of a photo safety program in Nova Scotia. Where intersection safety camera programs are present, most jurisdictions have a very high compliance and violation frequency is significantly reduced. A 2007 U.S. study found that 40% of collisions are intersection related and that there was a 25% decrease in right-angle collisions after intersection safety cameras were installed. Evidence has shown that the presence of intersection safety cameras do improve driver behavior. In Edmonton, where an intersection safety camera program is in place, the number of tickets issued for violations declined from 172,000 in 2002 to half that, Mr. Speaker, at 88 in 2006. In Calgary, where intersection safety cameras are in operation since 2001, right-angle injury collisions decreased 44.4%. Right-angle property damage collisions decreased by 27%. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, such measures at intersection safety cameras will drastically change driver attitudes. Mr. Speaker, this government is not looking for revenue from motorists. Rather, this is about seeing tangible results in addressing a very serious road safety issue. Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight as well that in regards to a pilot project, that proper signage to warn the public they're entering into that type of a situation with photo radar would be well advanced of entering that area. Also, that not necessary charges would result in every infraction. In fact, a threshold would be determined by the local police. Mr. Speaker, another component of photo safety is a pilot project for photo radar. The province will institute an 18-month photo radar pilot program where the speed limit is 70 kilometers per hour or less. It should be noted that police agencies must apply to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to seek approval on a location for a photo radar pilot project. There has to be a sound and convincing data provided to warrant its use at a particular location. Police have identified some locations where photo radar would be effective in reducing the incidence of speeding that have chronically plagued our communities. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that photo radar is a monetary penalty only, where profits are mandated into road safety programs. No demerit points will be applied to a person's driver record, and the photo will be of the rear of the vehicle capturing the license plate. This is to ensure that privacy concerns are addressed about capturing a driver's identity. The owner of the vehicle would bear the financial penalty unless they can prove the vehicle was used without their knowledge or consent. The purpose of the 18-month photo radar pilot program is to measure the effectiveness of photo radar technology in reducing speed and collisions. The final 6 months of a pilot program will be used to evaluate its effectiveness. Other provinces, Mr. Speaker, such as Alberta and Manitoba, have taken a similar approach in developing their photo safety programs. A recent study in British Columbia recorded a 14% reduction in crashes at camera locations, a 19% reduction at non-camera locations, and a 16% reduction along the study corridor. In the state of Victoria, Australia study, where the state of Victoria has the most intensive photo radar strategy in the world, the following are facts from that area: the proportion of speeding vehicles in overall traffic flow decreased by 85%. Excessive speeding in excess of 30 kilometers over the limit decreased by 66%. 60% decreases in collisions, 21% decrease in injury collisions, 30% decrease in fatalities. And Mr. Speaker, 92% of offending motorists paid their penalty within 56 days. Mr. Speaker, in July of 2007, the Ipsos-Reid poll marketing study found that 77% of Canadians support the use of cameras for red light violations. 69% support photo radar safety cameras on highways, and 64% support photo radar safety cameras in school zones. Mr. Speaker, road safety is everyone's responsibility. These amendments will address safety concerns for motorists and people panhandling or offering services on a roadway without a permit. As the minister responsible for our roadways and highways, I take these duties very seriously. We are not going to wait until a tragedy happens at the Willow Tree or another busy intersection to act. God forbid, Mr. Speaker, a serious injury or death should occur to someone who's on one of our roads. Mr. Speaker, this is not about attacking the less fortunate in our communities. It is about protecting the less fortunate people who are now panhandling on the roadways. Our roads are meant to be used by vehicles, and the public want efficient, safe roads on which to travel, and this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, addresses this. Police and the public have made it clear that these activities pose a danger for both motorists and for individuals. At the same time, nonprofit fundraising used in many communities across Nova Scotia can continue under these amendments when they seek the approval and obtain a permit from the local traffic authority. These activities can be conducted in a safe and responsible manner. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to move amendment second reading of Bill number 7, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Thank you. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise in my place today in my role as the newly minted Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal Critic to speak to this very important bill. And I look forward to working very hard in my new critic role, and I look forward to bringing many questions and concerns to the Minister and to the House. There's no question that safety on our highways is something that we all need to be very conscious of, and we are all very conscious of for the safety and well-being of the motoring public and also our many people who walk, bicycle, and use other modes of transportation on our highways. And there's no question that this is a very important bill to be moving forward. However, this is a collection of amendments thrown into one bill, and I'm very concerned and puzzled as to how this bill is being presented. From squeegee kids to nitrous oxide being lumped together in the same act shows that much in this bill has not been fully fleshed out. I'm concerned that there has been little to no consultation, and I and my colleagues have questions around the lack of detail, and we are concerned that those very important details will be left to the regulation process. That being said, there are some very important pieces to this act. In fact, they are so important to the safety of our streets, drivers, and pedestrians that they should be standing on their own rather than being lumped into this one bill. It appears that the government, and I say appears, that the government is choosing to play politics with some of these amendments, and that is somewhat problematic and raises many questions. And later, some of my colleagues will speak to those. Safety of drivers, pedestrians, and safety in general, as I said, is a huge concern. People have been injured or worse, killed in vehicle and/or pedestrian accidents. And one injury or one death is one too many. And unfortunately, in the last several weeks, we have heard and know of many people who have been injured and killed on our highways. Some of the amendments my caucus can give support to includes the initiatives to move forward with crosswalk safety. This amendment has been for far too long on hold. And in fact, it was in 1999 when one of my colleagues, a then transportation critic, pressed the Liberal government at the time to move forward with crosswalk safety. And again, the same member questioned the Conservative government in 2001. Then in 2004, several road safety initiatives were recommended by Transport Canada. And while those initiatives were implemented in other jurisdictions, unfortunately, they were not pursued by this government. And today, the minister acknowledges that since 2000, at least 78 accidents have happened in our crosswalks. And moving forward with this bill now, this amendment, is a very good thing. However, it is most unfortunate, especially for those like the family of Mary Beth Chalk, who was struck by a car on March 11th in 2006. So coming forward with this crosswalk safety initiative is something that we will encourage. And this amendment needs and should provide clarity of responsibility for both drivers and pedestrians. Increasing the fines for those who exceed the speed limit driving through school zones and temporary workplaces is something we also can support. The many work crews and children and adults in our school areas on our highways need to be assured that their safety comes first, and drivers who fail to comply will need to be held accountable. And for that, we feel that this is a good initiative coming forward in this bill. The amendment in this bill regarding street racing is welcomed, but I am puzzled when in August of this year, when my leader announced that our party would put forward legislation on street racing, this government was silent. And when asked, said they would ask the Road and Safety Advisory Committee on any steps that they should take. So we are flattered today that the government has decided to take action on an NDP idea by coming forward with this amendment. We will, however, be examining the details of this bill to ensure the adequate safety measures are in place and will rate it in comparison to our leader's bill. Another aspect of this bill I'd like to talk about is the amendment that prohibits the use of handheld cellular phones. This amendment is one we have been supporting for some time. And in fact, for those of you who can remember, it was a former NDP member, Jerry Pye, who had tabled this bill time and time and time again in years past. And now finally, Jerry Pye's bill is being taken seriously. And I think most of us can say we have been guilty of using a cell phone while driving. And I know I'm one of the guilty offenders. But I can tell you today, in all honesty, since I got a handheld device several months ago, that I'm working very hard and will ensure that this is one rule of the road that I will adhere to, as many of us will. So this amendment will certainly reinforce for all of us what a dangerous practice this is. We do, though, have many concerns and questions about the government's amendment, or rather, the lack of definitions of prohibited driver distractions or distracting activity. In this bill, there is no clarity, and the government has once again will rely on regulations to define distracting activity. Some of our questions are in the definitions. Will drivers' distracting activity include drinking coffee, listening to the radio, chatting with a passenger, perhaps eating a hamburger, or maybe listening to the chatter of children in the back seat? All of which can be considered to be forms of distraction. Leaving this to the regulatory process removes the responsibility from this government to take leadership. This amendment needs to have very clear and rational definitions. Photo radar and red light cameras are another aspect of this bill. Here we have many questions. Again, as with this entire bill, there is a lack of detail and a lack of clarity. We would be interested to know who this government has consulted with, or will this be another example of this government not fully fleshing out this important piece of legislation? We would like to see further development of this amendment. The 18-month pilot project suggested for photo radar and red light cameras needs to be reviewed after the 18-month period and brought back to the House for debate as to the results and effectiveness, and whether or not this pilot should continue. There are other problem areas with this bill, such as prohibiting certain activities on highways that pose a risk to safety. And because we have so many concerns around this aspect of the bill, again, it is not clear. Again, it singles out certain individuals within our society. It seems to be discriminating in some ways, and we really need to see some discussion and clarity around this aspect of the bill. Some of my other colleagues have concerns and questions, and we'll be speaking to this very issue a little later on. Overall, we do feel that this bill is still an important bill and does point out some good areas in which I suggested earlier, ideas that have come from NDP members in the past. We do feel that this bill should move forward to law amendments, bearing in mind the concerns that I have laid out. Details are important to the success of any bill, and consultation should be on the front end rather than after the fact or after regulations are already put in place. I trust that the government and the minister will take our concerns and our suggestions seriously should this bill move forward, and I look forward to further discussion on some of the suggestions made here. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to take the opportunity to thank our critic for transportation infrastructure renewal for allowing me the opportunity to say a few words on this. And the honourable member from Clare has always been a great member of our caucus. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of elements to Bill number 7 which one would argue are not only road safety but do have a justice element to them, especially when we're talking about the amount of fines, new infractions that are contained within it. Mr. Speaker, I want to start with the comments that I raised last night and I want to raise again. When the current Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal was the Minister of Justice, he would recall that on many times as justice critic I lamented his introduction of Justice Administration Acts. What he was doing with those bills was he was making a wholesale changes to a number of pieces of legislation and he was putting it under one bill. And in many ways, many of the changes in the bill might not have been cause for concern, but there was maybe one or two that did create cause for concern, which left us in a difficult situation of saying, do you say no to all of the changes because you don't like one or two, or do you pass the bill and hold your nose because there are some good changes contained with it? He continued to do that as Minister of Justice, regardless of the protests that I continued to make. And as I said last night, the new Minister of Justice seems to have taken a different approach, bringing in separate bills, dealing with separate issues, allowing us to be able to debate and explain to Nova Scotians clearly what these changes are meant to do. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, Bill number 7 is very similar to the Justice Administration Act, where it contains significant changes, some of which obviously would be supported by all members of this House, but others, which I would submit to you, deserve further reflection by members of the House of Assembly, further reflection by Nova Scotians, because there are significant changes that are being made here. We are being given statistics by the Minister to back up his belief that these changes should be made, but it's important that we take the time as legislators to look at some of the other statistics which seem to fly in the face of some of the information we've been given by the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal and by members of his staff regarding this particular bill. Speaker, I wanted to take the opportunity tonight to explain a bit better to Nova Scotians about what exactly is being proposed in Bill number 7. And looking at it quickly, I've been able to break it down to at least 6 significant changes being proposed under this one piece of legislation. First is the creation of image capturing enforcement system in Nova Scotia, better known as photo radar. Second major item is the pedestrian activated beacon, which is being put in place to help with crosswalk safety and safety at intersections in Nova Scotia. The third major item is dealing with street racing, where we talk about increased fines and increased suspension for anyone who is caught undertaking that activity. The fourth major item deals with prohibited driver distractions, but goes on to only specify handheld cellular phones as the one item that's in the legislation. I'll talk more about that later. The fifth major item that I see in this bill is proposing to double fines for speeding in temporary work areas. And the sixth major item in this legislation would be prohibiting solicitation along roadways, which I will speak about later, but is better known as a ban on squeegee kids and the poor soliciting drivers in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I want to start with the issue of photo radar. More importantly, what has photo radar done in other provinces? Because it's not a new concept. It's been done in other provinces. Mr. Speaker, it's been used in Alberta since 1988 and continues to be used. Ontario tried it from 1994 to 1995 when they got rid of it. And British Columbia, I understand, had it but either ended their program or greatly reduced it. Mr. Speaker, some of the benefits of photo radar, which we are told through research, is that photo radar is one of the tools available to police to enforce safe driving. Public advisories, consistent use of signage, and clear criteria for selecting sites that have been identified as high risk will promote the appropriate application of this tool. Photo radar, we are told, combined with other speed enforcement methods, can help lower the number of collisions and fatalities on our roads. Signage, for photo radar to work appropriately, signage should inform drivers about photo radar locations. Locations where photo radar could be used include where conventional enforcement is unsafe or ineffective, areas with a history of collisions, areas with an identifiable documented history of speeding problems, high-speed, multi-lane arteries, school and playground zones, construction zones, areas where the public or a community has expressed concerns related to speeding and problems are assessed and confirmed by enforcement agency responding to public concern. Speaker, the benefits of photo radar tells us that the public should be made aware of what the problems are and be encouraged to help identify problem areas. The public should also be aware of what is being done to correct or manage the problem and should be informed on a regular basis of the results, either positive or negative, of using photo radar. Mr. Speaker, an analysis of photo radar use in Calgary between 2001 to 2004 found a 29% decrease in collisions at 20 sites where that type of radar is used. Some law enforcement officials favor photo radar, but only if police officers monitor the technology and are there to pull over the cars. Speaker, according to the findings of a poll conducted on behalf of the Canada Safety Council, it said that the percentage of Canadians who support use of photo radar to identify vehicles that break speed limit in school zones is 84%. The percentage of Canadians who support the use of photo radar in identifying vehicles that break the speed limit on the highway, 69%. And the percentage of Canadians who support the use of cameras to identify vehicles that go through intersections after a traffic light has turned red is 77%. Mr. Speaker, last year, 14 people died in the Halifax Regional Municipality because of car crashes. Already, in 2007, 18 people have died in auto accidents, speeding being the predominant issue, is what we are told. A 2005 study of British Columbia experience attributed 1,542 injuries and 70 fatal collisions averted thanks to photo radar. Some of the same information that was shared by the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal when he first spoke on this. But Mr. Speaker, there's another side to photo radar. After those statistics I've just provided, one of the examples we should look at, because knowing that photo radar isn't something new, is what has happened in other jurisdictions that has used photo radar. Let's look at Ontario. They used photo radar from 1994 to 1995. Today, highway fatalities are up in Ontario, and many are calling for the return of photo radar in that province. Yet for one reason or another, the government refuses to bring back photo radar. Why is that? That's the question we need to ask, because we're being asked to implement a system that Ontario got rid of, and which Ontario to this day refuses to bring back to their province. So why is that? Mr. Speaker, in Ontario, the photo radar system was cancelled by the PC government of Mike Harris, as it was clearly politically unpopular. Why was it unpopular? Mr. Speaker, some argue that photo radar isn't a way to stop fatal highway accidents. BC got rid of photo radar in 2001, and Alberta still uses it. Yet photo radar failed to end deaths on their highways, as proved by the statistics. Don McDermott, the retired Assistant Commissioner of the RCMP, did a comprehensive study in 2004 for the province of Alberta. He concluded that photo radar is not a substitute for investments in human policing, driver training, and safer highway infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that we need to keep in mind, that there's a cost that comes with setting up photo radar in our province. In BC, for example, in 1996, 11 years ago, the total cost to set up photo radar in that province was $60 million. $60 million 11 years ago. What would that cost be to our province today if we are going to implement photo radar? Now, Mr. Speaker, what many of the critics of the system said, that a $60 million investment requires you to issue many tickets to be able to pay for this investment. And Mr. Speaker, because of this, there were accusations that the governments of the day were putting photo radars in inconspicuous spots rather than advertising the presence of photo radar locations. The idea of trying to obtain as many tickets as possible. Mr. Speaker, some of the critics of photo radar have called them cash grab machines rather than instruments of public safety. And why would they call them cash grab machines? Well, Mr. Speaker, in the city of Calgary, which the minister quoted some of the statistics from that city, one of the statistics he did not quote, though, Mr. Speaker, was that in 2005, the city of Calgary collected $11.5 million in revenue from photo radar tickets. $11.5 million. Now, was that just a one-year event? Not at all, Mr. Speaker, because in 2004, the same city of Calgary collected $12.5 million from photo radar, which is why Nova Scotians need to ask themselves, is photo radar strictly there for public safety on our roads, or is it meant to increase revenues for cities and for the province? And I simply put that out there. Again, Mr. Speaker, for Nova Scotians to consider, do we want photo radar in light of some of those statistics, in light of the fact that Ontario, who had it, got rid of it, and is rejecting any notion of bringing it back. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that many of the critics of photo radar will say is that it is irresponsible to believe that speeding is always the major factor in highway accidents. Mr. Speaker, in Ontario in 2004, there were 1,208 highway deaths. Of those 1,208, only 84 were attributed to illegal speeding. In 2006, the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration conducted a study which said that 80% of all police-reported car crashes were caused by driver distractions, not by speed. And I know the minister's talked about driver distractions, and I'll be talking a bit more about that. Mr. Speaker, what's most ironic is that if we look over at Germany, which has the Autobahn, which has no speed limits, and we've all heard the stories about the Autobahn, it has fewer fatalities in Germany than we have here in Canada with posted speed limits. So, again, something to keep in mind when Canadians are being asked whether photo radar should be implemented in this province. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Police Association, for example, has said that while they support photo radar, they only support it if it's administered by a police officer, because they argue that as part of discouraging people from speeding, it takes education, and it takes a police officer to be there to administer the ticket, explain why the person is being given a ticket, and try to deter the person from doing it again. So even the Canadian Police Association doesn't seem to be in favor of bringing in photo radars that are not manned by police officers. Now, Mr. Speaker, the question becomes, what type of system are we proposing here in Nova Scotia through Bill number 7? From what I can understand from photo radar, there are two different systems. One has the vehicle, which is manned inside by a peace officer. The other is a roadside camera that's automated and just does its work and doesn't need an actual person to operate that camera. I'm still unclear as to which of those two the minister is suggesting that we bring in here in Nova Scotia. And maybe he can clarify that afterwards. But, Mr. Speaker, What's being suggested here through Bill number 7 for Nova Scotians is an 18-month trial period. And I realize that the member from the critic from the official opposition indicated there should be a review of it. Well, there is a review that's proposed in the legislation, a 6-month review. In fact, at the end, within that 18-month period, the last 6 months of the 18-month period would include a review. But I did note her added suggestion that following that review, it be brought back to the legislature for discussion. And I certainly agree with her on that and commend her for that suggestion, and would hope that the minister would consider, after his pilot project, of bringing the matter back to the floor here so the elected members of this province can debate the issue rather than Cabinet making a decision behind closed doors. As part of the trial period, we are told that the sites will be chosen by the minister. And I believe the minister's comments were that he will be hearing requests, and as a result of that, making a final decision on which sites will be approved for this trial period. But what's interesting as well, Mr. Speaker, is I should note that in his proposal, in this trial period, the minister has as well included in Bill number 7 that the trial period will only take place in zones and on highways where the maximum speed limit is 70 kilometers or less. So basically, Mr. Speaker, I interpret from that these photo radar cameras will not be put on our 100 series highways, because for the most part, all of our 100 series highways have a maximum speed limit of more than 70 kilometers per hour. So it would appear that the trial period would take place mostly within city or municipal environments rather than on our 100 series highways. So that's something, again, I think it's important as we debate this bill that Nova Scotians be made aware of, that this is not a system that's going to be put on our 100 series highways, but instead will be put in the cities. And I did note that the chief of the Halifax Regional Police was here when the bill was first, the briefing took place, and he gave a list of some of the different streets here in the Halifax Regional Municipality where he would like to see the system put in place. And so, again, that's an important element of this bill I think Nova Scotians need to be aware of. The other important element here, Mr. Speaker, and I think you indicated previously to me in conversation that it's similar in Alberta, is that if this photo radar does get your license plate showing that you are going an excessive speed in these zones, it is the owner of the vehicle that will be issued the ticket. So there will be an onus on owners of vehicles to keep in mind who is driving their vehicle, because they may not necessarily have been at the wheel when the photo radar was picking up their license plate. And if I'm not mistaken, the bill also says that the only image that will be taken is of the license plate and of nothing else. And I certainly look forward to seeing how that system would work, because, Mr. Speaker, that brings in a whole host of privacy issues as well for Nova Scotian drivers if that image is taking more than just the license plate and is instead looking at the activities within the vehicle, which, with all due respect, is none of the business of our Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal or of the government. But again, we're told that the system would only look at the actual license plate. The other important element for Nova Scotians to keep in mind is that in Bill number 7, it does indicate that if you are to receive a fine under the photo radar system, it will not impact your point system. Now, as we all know, today, if you're stopped for speeding, you accumulate points on your license. Back in the old days, you used to lose points. Now I believe you accumulate points. I haven't had too much experience with the system, which I'm happy to report. So I'm not overly certain on how that point system works, and I consider that to be a good thing that I'm not an expert on that. Former members of this legislature had much more experience with the point system personally than I have had, and I don't wish to ever have that. So, but I think it's an important element as well, Mr. Speaker, because if we're going to implement a system that relies upon an image to find you guilty, then I believe that it's important to keep in mind that the point system will not apply as compared to the traditional way of being stopped for speeding, where the police officer issues you a ticket, and there certainly you will accumulate points. The other important element in here, Mr. Speaker, which goes to the issue I've raised of our photo radar, it's a cash cow. What the minister has put in the bill is to say that any excess in revenues once the capital cost of setting up photo radar has been put in place, any additional revenues has to go towards road safety. Again, road safety is not described. It's left to the regulations, and again, it's difficult for us to determine what does road safety mean. But obviously, Mr. Speaker, it does indicate that. We don't know what sort of revenues are going to be brought in, but that's put in the bill. Mr. Speaker, what's not in the bill regarding photo radar? The minister in his comments on second reading indicated that without a doubt proper signage would be put in place where photo radar is present. And my submission to him is, if that's the case, put it in the bill. Make it a requirement in the legislation through Bill number 7 that any place that photo radar is put in the province of Nova Scotia needs to have proper signage as per legislation. With all due respect, the minister saying that he will make sure that happens is not good enough if we're going to put in photo radar. And again, Mr. Speaker, I think you can tell from my comments, I'm still not sure about photo radar. I've given the pros, I've given the cons, and I think it's important that as part of this debate that Nova Scotians consider both sides, which is what I've tried to give in my address on second reading, is the pros and the cons. And I know the minister's been big on giving us the pros, and he has not shared many, if any, of the cons. But it's important to realize, Mr. Speaker, and we need to ask ourselves that there's no doubt that all of us are interested in road safety. The question is photo radar the answer, or is it simply a distraction from getting to the real root of problems of road safety here in this province? Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, in my own opinion, while I said I'm not sure about photo radar, one thing I am sure of: a big element of road safety that is not in Bill number 7 is asphalt. Because asphalt and better roads are what brings road safety. And I need to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that since 1999, this province has been under a Conservative government. And it pains me to no end that each week, when I make the commute back to my riding, to see that since 1999, almost 8 years, there is not yet a piece of asphalt that has been put to twin the highway from New Glasgow to the Cancel Causeway. 8 years, Mr. Speaker. 8 years. And yet we hear announcements for Antigonish, which we're going to have to wait 10 years or 8 years before we're going to see. Mr. Speaker, that's road safety, and that's negligence by this government. Because while they focus on the 101 and a bit on the 103, for almost 8 years, the 104 was completely neglected. And if there's one thing, Mr. Speaker, as a member from Richmond, from the Strait area, I really expected last year with the election of a premier from Inverness, a minister of transportation from Antigonish, and a minister of fisheries from Guysborough, that we are finally going to see action and a plan to twin that highway from New Glasgow straight to the Cancel Causeway. And again, it disappoints me to no end that as I stand here today, no such plan exists. Piecemeal approach is what has been taken, and road safety continues to be a big problem because statistics continue to show, and many Nova Scotians don't realize this, Highway 101 is not the most dangerous stretch of highway in this province. And I believe the minister and his staff know that, and the former minister would know that. The 104 from New Glasgow down to Sydney is the most dangerous highway for fatalities there is in Nova Scotia, and that has been shown time and time again. Yet unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it has not been given the attention, and Bill number 7 fails to address the concern over safety on that important stretch of highway, not only for road safety, but for the overall economic development of eastern Nova Scotia that would come with the twinning of that highway. So, on photo radar, Mr. Speaker, I think there needs to be more discussion, because this is a significant plan that's being proposed for our province, one that's been abandoned by British Columbia, one that Ontario had, and it has abandoned, and the Premier Dalton McGuinty continues to say to this day, no photo radar for Ontario. And yet, our Conservative government here in Nova Scotia says yes to photo radar for Nova Scotia. Nova Scotians need to be given an opportunity to fully reflect on whether they want that implemented in this province, and I'm not confident that the way our legislative system has been working in the last few sessions, that they will be given the ample opportunity to accurately and timely reflect on these changes and whether it's something that they want for us here in our province. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has talked about crosswalk safety and some of the changes that he has implemented. And Mr. Speaker, no one could argue against crosswalk safety. What is unclear to me is, in one sense, the Minister is bringing forward changes, and yet when he's asked more questions about crosswalk safety, he says, well, no, I have a review committee that I'm waiting to hear from. Well, why are we bringing forward changes if the review committee hasn't finished its work? And why are we not bringing them all in? And one of the things, Mr. Speaker, that both you and I know my colleague from Halifax, Clayton Park, have been very adamant in pushing for is red lights at crosswalks. And I know the Minister was asked that question, and he said, I'm waiting for the review committee. I have to let them do their work. So we're asked to look at changes now, yet we're unsure whether more changes will be coming or not. And I do hope that the Minister seriously considers the issue of red lights at some of the problematic crosswalks that we have, because too many Nova Scotians are being injured and too many lives are being lost because of crosswalk danger that we have here in our province, and especially here in the city of Halifax. But there is no doubt it was important through the legislation to clearly set out what was the responsibilities of the pedestrian, what was the responsibilities of the drivers. And that is mentioned here. As far as the increase in the fines, there is no doubt that that is something that would be supported, I'm sure, by all members of this House. And again, that goes to the challenge with this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, because while I've given you significant concerns over photo radar, I don't share the same level of concerns with the proposal for crosswalk safety, yet we're asked to vote yea or nay on everything put together. Mr. Speaker, the recommendations towards street racing is something, again, that is long overdue here in our province. We've seen too many cases of young people losing their lives, innocent people being killed because of street racing. It's no use for us to deny that it takes place. It's a reality, and it's been such for quite some time, and we're pleased that finally the government is taking action on this to try to deter Nova Scotians as much as possible to not undertake in this very unsafe and dangerous practice. And maybe the threat of seizure of vehicles is going to help in that deterrence. Only time will tell, but it clearly sends an important signal out to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, we're pleased as well because, as you'll recall, last year my colleague from the Liberal caucus from Glace Bay did introduce legislation banning handheld cell phones in Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that we have supported and that we continue to support. The problem with this, Mr. Speaker, is that once again, this government is asking to govern Nova Scotia through regulation. They're asking the legislature to adopt themes, general concepts, and saying, leave the rest to us. We'll take care of it in the cabinet room, behind closed doors, and then we will show you how it's going to actually work in a day-to-day operation. Mr. Speaker, I would submit to you that is not the way a well-functioning democracy should work. Yes, are there specifics in regulations that don't necessarily need to be put in front of the House? There probably is very technical, specific stuff. Yet, when we are told that the legislation makes reference to prohibited driver distractions, and yet the only one mentioned in Bill number 7 is handheld cell phones, we're leaving it by voting yes to this to say, Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal, go back to Cabinet, go with your colleagues, sit behind closed doors, and you tell us everything else that you think might be a prohibited driver distraction. That's not good enough, Mr. Speaker. And I have a concern with giving the Minister that type of authority without having to come back to this legislature and seek the approval of the elected members of the House. So again, this is an element where, in principle, we support, yet the way the bill is worded in Bill number 7 and the fact that it's mixed in with everything else causes us concerns. And I would submit to the Minister that he may want to reflect on how that specific clause is presented, because I believe a change in language and removing his ability through regulation to determine what prohibited driver distractions are may make it easier for us to consider support of that specific provision. I had the opportunity to be on a radio talk show with the justice critic of the official opposition just the other day, and too many people believe that when you say you want to ban handheld cell phones, it's just to stop people from having the phone up to their ear. What people need to realize is that that's just one thing people do with cell phones. There's now text messaging. And believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, people hold the steering wheel and yet use their two thumbs to text message while they are driving. Not only do they text message, now you can check your email on your cell phone while you're driving. And you can read your email, scroll down while you're driving. And now most cell phones allow you to browse the web while you're driving. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's important to realize that these are extremely dangerous activities. And I'd like to tell you that it's only older Nova Scotians who are doing this, but we've got 16-year-olds who are just learning how to drive that are learning how to text message while learning how to drive. You know, this is a serious concern, and it's something that we need to take very seriously. And to minimize it by saying it's just to stop people from putting the cell phone up to their ear is not the case. And so I think it's extremely important that we have the discussion about what is an appropriate use of a cell phone in a vehicle. Is having an earpiece sufficient to not be distracted? Is it complete ban on using the cell phone unless in emergency situations as mentioned in the bill? Which one is it? Is pressing your rearview mirror to talk to OnStar and ask them whether the restaurant down the road is still open or how to get to the local motel in a certain community, is that a safe practice? Those are all discussions that unfortunately the bill doesn't set out for us. We're instead told that the proposal is to ban the use of handheld cell phones and nothing else. And I would submit to you again, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough. Because I don't think it's enough for us as legislators to be able to go back and say, I voted this way on Bill number 7 because I had all of the details in front of me and I felt they were reasonable, or I didn't think they were reasonable and I sought to make changes. I think we need to see more information on that before we can make a responsible decision, because it is an important issue. And as I mentioned in some of the statistics, while we blame driving and excessive speed on many of the accidents, the statistics show us that driver distraction is the main cause of accidents and fatalities on our roads here in Nova Scotia. And I think the Minister has recognized that in some of the changes that are being proposed. Mr. Speaker, we see as well where the Minister is proposing to double the fines for speeding in temporary work areas. Again, these are issues which have been raised by members from all sides of the House. We've talked about school zones. We've talked about work zones. This is something, again, that would not be a problem for us to support, but as I mentioned before, it's again mixed in with other items which are a bit more cause for concern when one looks at them, yet unfortunately we're being asked to consider them all in one bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the final major one in here, and there are significant smaller changes, but one of the final ones is the one that deals with the prohibition of solicitation along roadways here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, all of us here as elected members who travel to the city from all the different corners of our province, it would be impossible for you to travel inside the city or go any distance in the city without encountering at intersection, for the most part, young people, some not so young, who are either asking to clean your windshield, or known as squeegee kids, or people who are walking with signs asking for people to give them money. Mr. Speaker, this is a phenomenon which is not new in our country or not new in the world, but I can tell you it's something that I don't think you saw very much of 10 years ago. But you certainly see a lot of it here in HRM in the last number of years. My question, when I look at this, is this section of the bill really aimed at improving driver safety and road safety, or is it a means of trying to make disappear a social problem that exists here in our province? Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, if we're being asked to vote yes to make sure that there's no longer anyone at intersections holding a sign, asking for help, there's no longer anyone asking to clean her windshield, one would expect in return the government would say, here's what our plan is to help these individuals. Yet, Mr. Speaker, this bill was introduced last week. There's no bill that has come forward to say, here's what Plan B is if you vote in favor of this change. Mr. Speaker, our leader of the Liberal caucus has been very adamant, both during his leadership campaign, prior to his leadership campaign, and since becoming leader, about the issue of poverty here in Nova Scotia, not just in Halifax, but throughout the province, and the fact that we as legislators need to do more to ensure that Nova Scotians are given equal opportunity to enjoy a good quality of life here in this province and good opportunities. And too many people, Mr. Speaker, as the years go by, are being left behind. And we have a choice as legislators where we can look the other way and try to make the problem disappear without addressing it, or will the government say, vote in favor of this because it's a road safety issue, but know that here's what our plan is to deal with the social root of why people are standing at our intersections and at our roadways to start off with. And I can't blame the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal for this, because I can see where he is talking about road safety, and that's part of his bill. But he is a member of government, and he's a member of a larger cabinet. And he has an opportunity as well to be able to say to his colleagues, if I'm going to be banning squeegee kids and people from soliciting at intersections, you need to do something in return to help them out. And that's not happening here. And again, Mr. Speaker, as I've said throughout my entire speech, this is an element that's being packaged in with other items which we have no problem supporting. But this is another element of this bill where we have concerns. And unfortunately, the fact that it's all being bundled into one bill puts us in a difficult position of either saying yes to everything, even though there's concerns that we have and changes we'd like to see, or saying no to everything, knowing that there is some very positive elements contained within this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I believe Bill number 7 is one that members of this House should take the time to debate. I've tried tonight to give different statistics, a different side of photo radar and what was presented by the Minister. I would encourage other members to reflect on some of these changes as well, and to be able to allow Nova Scotians the opportunity to tell us, do they support these changes? And with all due respect, I don't think we can just simply send this off to law amendments and then decide afterwards, because Nova Scotians need to hear from us prior to going to law amendments to determine if there is any concerns with this. Sending this bill to law amendments by only hearing the statistics quoted by the Minister of Justice about the benefits of photo radar is not an appropriate debate.
Minister of Transportation.
Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal. I apologize. But only listening to that side, Mr. Speaker, and then sending it to law amendments, most Nova Scotians would be left with the impression that the opposition believes photo radar is only a good thing. There is no downside to it. He did not share in his presentation the Ontario experience. He did not share the fact that BC got rid of it. He did not share the fact that even though they're asking for it in Ontario, the police are, the government continues to say no. There has to be other ways of reducing speed and reducing road accidents other than going back to photo radar. So that's some of the challenges that are faced in this legislation. I hope I've given an opportunity to Nova Scotians listening and to members of this House to reflect on some of the concerns with this bill and some of the positive elements that are contained in the legislation. Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to the debate that will take place from other members of the House. We'll then be going to law amendments and see what's going to happen at that stage. But Mr. Speaker, as I've indicated to you, I have issues with the bill. I've not made any final determinations on the bill, and I await to see what the further discussion is going to be on this, and then as we move forward to closure on second reading and the vote as to whether this bill does move forward or not in its current state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognize the honourable member for Preston on an introduction.
Yes. Thank you very much. I get a little bit upset there for a second. Don't blame me. I wasn't taking your space. I'd like to make an introduction to West Gallery if I could. One very special person in my life, my brother, Richard Caldwell, is here. And with him is Dilip Moketkar, and if I pronounce your name improperly, I apologize for that. But Dilip is a senior engineer, actually the director marine ship support for all the Navy ships in Canada. So it's a very important individual to be here and supports our troops when they have to move around in our ships. And my brother also works at the HMCS dockyard, and he's responsible for keeping all the generators working in all the ships. So they both have very important jobs that support our country and the people in the country, along with all the great people that work with them. So I would like the House to offer them a warm welcome for being here.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure this evening to join in the debate on Bill 7 with respect to the amendments proposed by the Minister responsible for Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal in respect to the Motor Vehicle Act. My colleague from Richmond did an adequate job of setting out the various pieces of this legislation, and I'd just like to add my commentary on a number of those particular aspects of the bill which I think are important for people to understand. And the first thing I would say, and I guess I'll start off with photo radar as well, and photo radar, in fact, Mr. Speaker, has had a very mixed experience across the country, as my colleague pointed out. In this particular bill, there's a proposal for a pilot project set out over 18 months. And Mr. Speaker, I think that if this is to be the case, if it is going to be a pilot project, then it should, in fact, be a real pilot project. That's what the legislation should authorize. There should be an 18-month period for the government. There should be a proper report generated. That report should come back to the House of Assembly, because that would inform the debate about whether or not you actually wanted to go ahead with photo radar. So the bill itself should not allow the government to simply say they're going to have a pilot project, and then at the end of it, no matter what the report says, just extend photo radar as a fact in the province without coming back to the legislature and saying, here's what our report found, here were the recommendations, and we're just going to go ahead and without any debate in the legislature, continue with photo radar. If it's going to be a pilot project, it really should be a pilot project. And then once the results of that project are known and the report comes back to the legislature, then we could have a more, a fuller debate on the merits of whether or not Nova Scotians would want to see photo radar implemented on a full-time basis in the province. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, and this is something I know I've mentioned this on a number of occasions, certainly in the public discussion when people have asked me about photo radar, I've related to them the experience that I had in other countries where they have a very specific use for photo radar, and they say, look, the purpose of photo radar is to slow down the traffic and to make sure that people actually obey the speed limits. It's not meant to be a cash cow. It's not meant to generate more money for the province. So what they do is they actually put up signs. They actually put up signs in advance to warn people that the photo radar is going to be there. And this kind of notice, the notice provisions are, and the minister is saying that he agrees with this, but the notice provisions are important. When we do this all the time already in the province, I mean, we do that on the bridge. I've seen neighborhood signs that say the speed is monitored by radar in this area. When we were using the airplanes to monitor speed on the highways, there were signs up around the province. In fact, I think some of them are still up. I don't know if they still use the airplanes or not, but the signs are still there and the markings on the highway are still there. So that was a function of notice with respect to the use of photo radar. And it seems to me, and I've had this discussion also with RCMP officers, I mean, they've told me that they're not tax collectors for the government. They're there as a function of public safety, to be a presence on the highway, to be a presence on the streets, and to slow down the traffic and to make sure that people are essentially doing the things that they ought to be doing, which is obeying the speed limits. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, those are my comments with respect to photo radar. I think it ought to be an actual pilot project with a report back to the legislature, and then the full debate on whether or not we're going to implement it as a program province-wide. Now, I don't know, and I'm not trying to question the member from Richmond's reading of the legislation, because he's certainly perfectly competent to do that, but he talked about the fact that points that were accumulated as a result of a photo radar offense wouldn't be counted against your license, and that's not actually true. You have to be able to satisfy the court that you were not the driver of the car, and if you can satisfy the court you were not the driver, then the points wouldn't count against your license. It's still an offense if you're the owner of the vehicle. That's what it says in the legislation. Okay, well, that's not what the legislation says. No, it doesn't. But if that's what the minister intends, that there will be no points, then it's going to need to be spelled out better than it is in the legislation currently, because it very specifically says, and I don't mind, and let me, you know, reading the actual section if I can find it, with respect to the question of points. Maybe I'll come back to it if I can find it as we complete the debate. Section 15. Okay. Subsection does not apply if the owner satisfies the court that at the time the vehicle was involved in an offense, the owner was not driving the motor vehicle and no other person was driving the motor vehicle with the owner's expressed or implied consent. A person who is guilty of an offense pursuant to the section is not liable to imprisonment, respect. Subsection 3. Yeah. Okay. And the point system taken does not apply to that offense. So you're. Well, I'll take my friend's interpretation of it. But it's not clear. At least it's not clear to me that that's the case. But I will. Yeah. He says he had to read it a few times, so. Anyway, as I say, it isn't clear to me that that's. I understand the intention. It isn't clear to me that that's actually what the legislation does. The member for Richmond points out that with respect to photo radar, this section of the bill is something that there's not going to be unanimity in the province on. There probably isn't unanimity among the caucuses with respect to it, and it's unfortunate when they become omnibus bills in this way, because although you might agree with much of what is in the bill, and for example, the crosswalk safety piece, which doesn't seem to me is controversial in any way, you want to support that, but you might not necessarily want to support the photo radar section. So. You know, we're going to have to. You're going to have to balance those things off in determining the bill. But perhaps there are things that can be done to try and make the bill a better bill as it goes through the Law Amendments Committee. The street racing piece, and I find this interesting because I first proposed a bill with respect to street racing some time ago. I laid out what I thought the elements of it should be. I came back and introduced and set out for the public a second kind of draft of the street racing bill. It seems that much of what I proposed in that piece of legislation is contained in this. So this is a real problem on our highways. It's become more evident over the years. I heard from a gentleman, a shortly after I had introduced mine, who said that he lost his son some years ago in a street race. And his son was participating in it. And that's the thing. It's not just the innocent bystanders. It's the kids who are involved in it as well. And I say kids. I know they're not all kids, but in this case, they were. He just said he had wished that this kind of legislation had been around in those years. And perhaps if the gravity of the offense was understood, the circumstances would have been different in his family. So these things profoundly affect. The consequences of street racing are so grave that we have to do whatever we can to try and drive home to potential offenders that it's not going to be tolerated on our streets. And the ability to demand the surrender of license and the impound of vehicle, which seems sometimes extreme, is in the circumstances, I think, a reasonable limitation on people's rights. I also note that originally, when I first proposed this, there were some in the government benches who said it wasn't necessary, that said they didn't have to go forward with this kind of legislation because it wasn't an epidemic on our highways. And I'm glad to see that the government relented in relation to this particular offense. I think it's one that deserves the attention of the legislature, and I'm pleased to see that this piece of the bill is in. Much like with the points piece, we're going to look at it again and try to reread it and make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, because to make a mistake on it would not, wouldn't serve a proper legislative function. On the cell phone ban, around here, we kind of refer that to as the Jerry Pie bill. Jerry introduced that legislation on a number of occasions over the years. He talked about what he considered to be a real problem on our highways. The member for Richmond pointed out there's a lot of things that go on in cell phones today. I mean, the BlackBerry is virtually ubiquitous with politicians at the very least, and among most people in business today, they have BlackBerries which have so many functions on them, everything from email to telephone to texting to there's even games on them, Mr. Speaker. So there's a lot that can happen on one of those little handheld devices. And the minister asked me if I play the games on it. Well, I'm not technologically advanced enough to get into those, but I do use the telephone and the email functions, and so I know that there's a lot that on those more than just the phones. The other question was the whole question of what's going to be defined in the regulation as a prohibited driver distraction, and that's a really good question. It's pretty broad. It's part of allowing the government, again, by regulation, to define things, not knowing what it is that the government is going to add in after the fact, after the legislation is passed by the House. Frankly, on this side of the House, we're tired of it. We're tired of passing bills that have broad regulatory powers only to find out later on that the government does something under regulation that was not contemplated by the legislature at the time. And had we known, we would have had a much different debate. So I think we have to start looking at how we rein in some of these regulatory powers that are being essentially abused by the government. If they want to do and they want to proscribe specific activities by drivers in cars, they should be prepared to set them out. What are those kinds of distractions going to be? And I'll give you just a brief example. I know that a lot of the vehicles nowadays have satellite radio, and it's I'm sure for a lot of people it's very, very useful. and it gives you access to a broad variety of channels from across North America. But one of the functions on those satellite radars is that they will give you sports scores, and they will flash them up on the screen, right? And so it's a legitimate question as to whether or not that would be a prescribed distraction. And they update them, very, very quickly, and literally almost instantaneously with whatever sporting event is going on. So, those are the kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself when you look at these kinds of regulatory powers. The temporary work zones and the ability to double the fines, this is an occupational health and safety question for those people who have to work on the highways. They're working under sometimes very dangerous circumstances on our highways to try and make sure that our transportation infrastructure is the best quality. And you will see this, and I've seen this many times in the United States. You will go along, you will see the sign for the construction zone, and the next sign that you will see is a sign that says that fines are doubled in this zone, right? And to drive home to the message to people that this is a workplace. This is a place where individuals are coming to work. And they have the right to be protected. They have the right to be safe in their workplace the same way that we all expect to be safe in ours. So I must say, this is, in my view, the kind of thing that those workers deserve to have. They deserve to have that kind of protection. The last thing that I'm going to just address, and very briefly, is what has become known as the squeegee kids piece of the legislation. And I have to say, I, like everyone else, I travel around the city. And I see the individuals who are there on the streets. Many of these people are on the jagged edge of society. Every day, many of them are homeless. They're poor. They have a very difficult time trying to maintain any quality of life whatsoever. And the idea that you can somehow bring in legislation that's going to fine them or to take action which is somehow going to have a real meaning to them when they're already economically so impoverished. I don't understand, other than making the political point, other than making the political statement with respect, I don't really understand the efficacy of this legislation. If we want to take those people off of the streets, if we really want to deal with what's putting them there in the first place, then we're going to have to deal with the economic issues and the social issues that underlie what's putting them there. And those are issues relating to poverty, relating to a host of social considerations, everything from education to health, to mental health, to, there could, in every case, I'm sure, it would be a different constellation of social difficulties that places a person in this circumstance. And we are standing here as legislators and saying in legislation like this that we are going to judge all of them to be the same, and we are going to pass judgment on these people in a way that I just don't think is fair. I think we need to take a broader view of this and try and establish how we are best able to take them off of the street corners and out of the roadways by giving them decent alternatives to the lifestyle that they're leading. I think that any society is measured by its capacity to have compassion for people who find themselves in the circumstances that these young people, a lot of them are young people, find themselves in. And so, you know, my assertion or my plea to the government would be to look at this and ask yourself, is this really what you want to do? Do you really think that this is going to deal with this issue? Because I really think if you think about it in your heart of hearts, you will know that this just isn't going to deal with the problem. I mean, somebody who has no economic means to pay a fine, the fact that you write them another ticket is not going to deter them from doing what they're doing. You have to address the underlying issues associated with why they're there. So, Mr. Speaker, those are my comments on the bill. This is going to go forward to law amendments. We're going to have the opportunity to talk about it some more, to discuss the various provisions in the bill. I look forward to that. I look forward to hearing the varied opinions, some of which have been shared already. And I will make this final point on it, Mr. Speaker, because already on this bill, I think we've seen some very good and constructive debate around the various aspects of the various pieces that are in the legislation. And I think that's good for the legislature as a whole. I think it's a good discussion of public policy, and that really is why we're here. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and pleased to rise to my place tonight and speak on a few of the aspects of this bill. One of the areas that we've been involved in the House, of course, is crosswalk safety, and this is an issue that has been taken up not just here in Metro, but in many parts of Nova Scotia, because we have simply seen too many accidents and also 11 fatalities on crosswalks since the year 2000. We've been looking at what other provinces have been doing because there are good records in other provinces. One of the ones that I looked at was in Regina, where pretty well throughout the city they do have flashing lights, red lights, to indicate that people have entered the crosswalk, and Regina has an outstanding record of crosswalk safety. Here in our province, as much as we've been trying to educate Nova Scotians about responsible use of crosswalk safety, the fact that we have over 600 injuries in HRM again since the year 2000 alone is justification for the minister to look at bringing in a bill that will increase safety. We raised this issue in the House a number of times since the spring of 2006, and now I think Nova Scotians are really asking for action on this particular issue. I think the time has come. There's no question that I think our schools can become a wonderful avenue and provide a great opportunity for crosswalk safety. Whether we do it by things like bookmarkers, whether or not we put it inside one of the current courses that we have in our school. I'm more in favor of a reminder, an education program that's there each year. There are occasions when we do have days in our school where there are assemblies, and bringing in somebody who is again not just an expert but a real advocate
for crosswalk safety. The record in our province is in fact quite alarming. I filled in for our critic at one time on this issue. Had an opportunity to speak publicly about this, and it's one of the areas that I feel needs to undergo a substantial change. It is interesting. The town of Kentville is one of the communities that I have noticed in the past year. They have now installed red flashing lights. Also, the pedestrian who enters the crosswalk has the opportunity to push the button. It is almost immediately engaged, and they are red flashing lights. They have these now installed at the busiest crosswalks in town. There is no question that from a pedestrian point of view, I think you feel safe if you've experienced it from the other side, which is as a driver, because immediately your attention is caught by a good eye-level view of the flashing lights. And and again, Kentville is a community that had a number of accidents, and in fact, certainly one death that I am familiar with on the crosswalks of their community. So they've gone ahead with this, and I believe it's one that we need to be taking a strong look at implementing, instituting here in Nova Scotia. In many ways, it's not really the fault of the lights all the time, but rather I believe it's the mindset as well that we take to the crosswalk, and very often we don't make eye contact, for example, with the driver, and I believe that's again one of the safest ways of personal responsibility is to have a look at the driver as you enter the as you get ready to move into the crosswalk, and again I think because of the number of incidents that we have had, fatalities, serious injury, and some very close calls, and perhaps in fact when our speaker gets an opportunity to stand on his feet on this bill, he'll talk about one very close call, I believe, that he has had here in the city as well. And there's nothing like those personal accounts. But again, if the driver and the pedestrian do make good contact, then I feel that's another element that we can take as a good and safe practice. Once again, I think as we look across the country, there are a number of changes that are taking place, so that we can bring much more, I guess, attention to this issue, as well as doing what we can with the mechanical apparatuses that are available to us. It'll be interesting when we go to law amendments, as well as we hear from Nova Scotians and some of the people who have a degree of expertise on this particular issue coming forward. In this House, of course, we have had petitions entered. We also had the school community in Dartmouth, where we saw two tragedies within the past 3 years, and they collected a massive online petition for all legislators to bring this issue once and for all to the floor of the legislature and to have some concrete actions taken. So this is one that all parties, I'm sure, will find the resolve to move it forward. One of the things, of course, there's no question, that's an area that we can support, but as we move and take a look at other aspects of this legislation, then this is the area that we as a party have to take a serious look at. What will be our final position on photo radar, for example. So having an omnibus bill here could be a little bit problematic because I don't think there's an MLA in the House that isn't committed to the first issue that I've talked about here, and that is crosswalk safety. In terms of photo radar, we have a history here where some jurisdictions have had it in place for a period of time and then decided against continuing with photo radar. One example, of course, is Ontario, and British Columbia as well had photo radar and no longer have it in use. It's one where the jury is out, I guess, in terms of its total effectiveness, and as a result, our caucus will study this issue again to gather in expertise from other jurisdictions before we make a final decision. It seems, however, that perhaps photo radar, once again, like many of the tools and the instruments that police do use to facilitate their work, and there may in fact be very well locations where photo radar can be an asset. And some of the ones would include areas that have proven to be very troublesome. And I think many of us as MLAs have met with either the local RCMP or police force, or on occasions I get to sit down with Inspector Brown in New Minas, who is responsible for the Valley detachments. And inevitably there's one or two roads, one or two areas where, once again, I will say, there have been a number of accidents here, or a number of areas where straight stretches, few homes, and very, very high speeds, and in fact a couple of areas in my riding are not immune to racing, to cars racing, especially during, it seems, the summer months. The summer months in particular seem to invite that activity. So there could be some areas where photo radar could be of some value, and that is a personal perspective that I take to this debate. Areas again that have documented history of speeding, where the police can tell you that over the past month or the past 6 months or the past year, this is the number of violations that have occurred in this area. So if they've picked up this number of speeders, we certainly know that this is a very serious problem for particular areas. Areas where there are a history of collisions, and that's one of the things in most of our areas that seem to have some anomaly in the road construction, or weather conditions seem to impact to a greater degree, or the approaches don't all have the highest amount of visibility, and it is a chronic problem of having a fair number of accidents. So this again is potentially another area where photo radar could be of some help. Now, the history of accidents relating to the first topic I talked about today, and that is crosswalks, and that may be another area where photo radar could be of some assistance. These are areas of high concentration, high density of population just for a set time. So during the hours of a school day, maybe a time again when photo radar can come into play. Our school zones are very, very specified with signage, with a speed limit, and we have children that go onto the sidewalks, cross roads, some even, of course, during the recess period in high schools, during the noon hours. So again, photo radar in those areas may in fact be able to complement the eyes of security guards and those that are there to assist students in crossing the road, that carry the sign to stop. All of these people do sometimes need that technology, I believe, to help them out a little bit and clean up some of those areas. Also, construction zones have become a considerable problem for us in this province. Again, another location where we've had a couple of deaths, unfortunately, and these may be areas that again can be identified to be helped with radar. Areas where the public or a community has expressed concerns relating to speeding and problems are assessed and confirmed by enforcement agencies responding to public concern. We sometimes, of course, get major housing developments. We all know how quickly some of our business areas can grow up in our midst and have dramatic increases of traffic, and with that accidents and also infractions of existing rules of the road. And so again, perhaps that's an area where some help can be obtained through the use of radar. The public should be made aware of what the problems are and be encouraged to help identify problem areas. Public should be aware of what has been done to correct or manage problems and should be informed on a regular basis of the results, positive or negative, using photo radar. So if this is implemented on a trial basis, then Nova Scotians and those areas in particular that are part of any trial, then people get good feedback on what the observations have been and the analysis of that kind of data to help move this forward if it is going to be implemented on a long-term basis. For example, an analysis of photo radar use in Calgary between 2001 to 2004 found a 29% decrease in collisions at 20 sites where that type of radar is used. So again, the effectiveness of photo radar may be in selected sites, whether it's in Sydney, Yarmouth, Halifax, Dartmouth, wherever we seem to already have collected a fair body of information, now photo radar could become an instrument to deter those who are, pretty regularly, breaking the law with speed, not yielding to traffic, whatever the infraction may be. Some law enforcement officials favor photo radar, but only if a police officer monitors the technology. And perhaps this is one of the real contentious points about photo radar, is that it's a constantly constant electronic device that is snapping the license plate of people as they drive by, without anybody manning the technology, and some see that as a bit of a cash cow, especially on major highways, where they've determined that going, whether it's 8 kilometers or 10 kilometers over the posted speed limit, then you're going to get nailed for the infraction. So there seems to be, I guess, some of the literature is challenging the use of photo radar in that regard. According to the findings of a poll conducted on behalf of the Canada Safety Council, percentage of Canadians support the use of photo radar to identify vehicles that break speed limit in school zones is as high as 84%. Now, here in the legislature, we introduced a bill calling for the doubling of the fine when we have a school zone infraction. So that was again one way of trying to change the culture of drivers in an area like the school zone, and we're all very much aware that children are not 100% safety conscious, and will go out onto the street without looking, will enter crosswalks at a very rapid speed, almost running across the crosswalk, and those prove, as we know, in this city, unfortunately, have proved to be tragic. So again, I go back to this area. If we're going to take a look at supporting the bill, we need to know a significant amount of detail around what will the parameters be, the regulations be, in other words, in how photo radar would be used. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the percentage of Canadians in this Canada Safety Council poll went down when it was just used as to target speeders on an open freeway. The percentage of Canadians who support the use of cameras to identify vehicles that go through intersections after the traffic light has turned red, once again, the percentage there was at 77%. So ones that are clearly, ones that are often violated and often end in very serious accidents, because there's very often no preparation for that from an oncoming vehicle. So again, a very high percentage of people support photo radar in very specific locations, a targeted reason for having it implemented. Last year, again in HRM, there were 14 people who died as a result of car crashes, and a few of those were people, again, who went through a red light and no expectation of a vehicle coming. In 2007, 18 people have died in auto accidents, and speeding being the predominant issue here in HRM. So it's one that I'm really looking forward to this bill going to law amendments. As my time quickly comes to a close here, as we break for late debate, and I hope to resume and make some further comments around the use of cell phones and other aspects of the bill. And I look forward in particular to those who will come into to law amendments and shed, I guess, expertise and good data on many aspects of a bill that has a number of parts to it that our caucus feels, in fact, are overdue. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.